Hi, I'm Toro, and this is the World in Series. Each episode in this series is a quiet journey through time, softly exploring the people, places, and events that shaped a single year in our shared history. So get comfortable, let your thoughts wander, and let's drift back to the world as it was. The world in 1915. Greetings, dear listener. It's Toro here, welcoming you to another quiet journey through time. I invite you now to settle into a position of rest, your shoulders soft, your breathing slow and even. Perhaps your hands are folded gently in your lap, or your head rests upon a pillow warmed by the day's memory. Around you, let the world grow still, as though the air itself has decided to pause. We are about to drift together into the soft and muted year of 1915, a year suspended between eras, its moments unfolding in both the hush of everyday life and the quiet turning of history's great wheel. It is a time when the clink of horse-drawn carriage wheels still echoed in the streets. Yet telephones and cinema reels had already begun to weave new rhythms into daily life. Somewhere, across an ocean, a pianist practices a nocturne. Somewhere else, a printing press breathes out the day's news, each sheet warm to the touch. Close your eyes if you wish, and picture the subtle glow of a lamplight on wallpaper patterned with pale flowers. Outside, the evening air might smell faintly of wood smoke or sea spray. In that gentle quiet, the doors of memory open, and we step, not hurriedly, but as though wandering a slow garden path into the world as it was more than a century ago. The year's first dawn rises in pale winter light over cities and villages alike. In New York, ice clings to the edges of the Hudson River. In Paris, the Seine moves sluggishly under frosty bridges. In rural China, farmers begin their day with hot tea in bowls that warm their hands. The pulse of humanity in 1915 beats softly, spread across continents, tied together by invisible threads of letters, cables, and dreams. Tonight, we will explore not just the events, but the textures of this year, the fabrics people wore, the scents in their kitchens, the sounds in their streets. We will linger by the slow tide of invention, wander through the hush of theaters and concert halls, and pause beside the lives of those born and gone in this year's embrace. Our pace will be unhurried, our steps small and steady. The story will be our lullaby. So let us take that first step into 1915 and feel the air of another age wrap around us like a quilt. World events. The world of 1915 did not rush. It moved with a measured rhythm, as if conscious of each moment's weight. And yet, beneath the surface of quiet routines, the year carried deep currents. In January, a chill wind moved across the English coastline, whispering change. On the 19th, the residents of Great Yarmouth and King's Lynn woke to a sound unlike any they had known: the deep, steady hum of German Zeppelin airships overhead. These massive, gas-filled shapes floated slowly against the gray sky, their movement almost graceful despite the unease they brought. People stepped into doorways or peered from windows, their breath clouding in the cold morning air as the silhouettes passed and faded into the horizon. It was a subtle but unmistakable sign that the distance between the front lines and the home front had grown shorter. 6 days later, on January 25th, something quieter but equally remarkable happened. Thousands of miles away in the United States, Alexander Graham Bell, standing in New York City, spoke into a telephone and was heard in San Francisco. His words traveled invisibly, carried by wires and newly perfected vacuum tube amplifiers. Those present would later describe it with a sense of wonder, like hearing a voice emerge from a seashell held to the ear. February brought shifting tides at sea. On the 4th, Germany declared the waters around the British Isles a war zone. This meant that merchant ships, even those of neutral countries, could find themselves at risk. Ports felt the change first, the quiet caution of captains studying new routes, dock workers pausing to discuss the latest reports. Across the Atlantic, in quiet living rooms, readers of morning papers tried to picture these distant waters and the ships that crossed them. In March, the Western Front saw the Battle of Neuve Chapelle. In northern France, mist clung to the low fields as British and Indian troops prepared to advance. It was a short battle by the standards of the war, lasting only a few days, but its plans and movements were carefully drawn, like a deliberate brushstroke on a much larger canvas. For those in the surrounding villages, the sounds carried faintly on the air, distant booms, the low rumble of movement, reminders that the great conflict was still pressing close. April would bring events that lingered in memory. On the 22nd, at Ypres in Belgium, soldiers experienced for the first time the wide-scale use of poison gas. It came as a strange, pale cloud, moving slowly across the fields. In the chaos of war, this innovation was not met with the cheers of invention, but with a wary recognition of a threshold crossed. The newspapers described it in muted language, but those who had seen it would not forget. Only 3 days later, on April 25th, far away from the mud and forests of Belgium, the shores of Gallipoli received their first landings. In the early light, boats approached from the sea, carrying soldiers from Australia, New Zealand, Britain, and France. The sound of waves against the hulls was steady. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. The beaches here were narrow and backed by steep ridges. 4 months after, the campaign would continue, under the heavy sun of summer, through the shifting winds of autumn. Until a careful, quiet withdrawal was completed in December, each step back measured to avoid drawing unwanted attention. At nearly the same moment in the Ottoman Empire, another movement began. Armenian men serving in the army were reassigned to labor battalions, a decision that marked the beginning of a darker chapter. These changes did not come all at once, but in steps, each small enough to be overlooked from afar, yet heavy with meaning for those living them. In May, the seas bore both marvel and tragedy. On the 7th, the RMS Lusitania, a British ocean liner, was nearing the coast of Ireland. The morning was bright, the waters calm. Then, in a sudden moment, it was struck by a German torpedo. Within 18 minutes, the ship was gone. Survivors spoke of the strange quiet that followed, a silence on the water, broken only by voices calling out for help. Later that month, on May 23rd, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary, shifting the balance of alliances. Across Italian towns, posters were pasted to stone walls, and the news traveled on trains and telegraph lines. Some greeted it with solemn determination, others with quiet apprehension. The summer brought its own events. In August, a hurricane swept into the Gulf of Mexico, striking Galveston and New Orleans. Residents remembered the rising wind, the salt taste of the air, the sound of shutters rattling before the storm arrived in full. Afterward, there was the slow, patient work of repair, roofs mended, debris cleared, lives pieced back together. September saw a different kind of gathering, the Zimmerwald Conference in Switzerland. Here, representatives from socialist movements across Europe met in a small village surrounded by green hills. They came not with drums or banners, but with notebooks and ideas, seeking a way to speak of peace in a time when peace felt distant. In that same month, a machine was tested in Britain, a prototype unlike anything seen before. It was called Little Willie, a tank designed to cross trenches and rough ground. The machine moved slowly, its engine a steady growl. Those who saw it could not yet guess how such inventions might reshape battlefields in years to come. As the year neared its close, science offered another quiet turning point. On November 25th, Albert Einstein presented the completed field equations of general relativity. In lecture halls, chalk met blackboard, tracing curves and symbols that described the bending of space and time itself. To those hearing it, The ideas felt vast and strange, like a window suddenly opened onto an unseen dimension. And in December, as snow fell in parts of the northern hemisphere, two events spoke of human creation. In Detroit, the 1 millionth Ford automobile rolled off the assembly line, its paint still fresh, its parts fitting neatly together after a journey down the line. And in Helsinki, Jean Sibelius conducted his Fifth Symphony for the first time. Music rising like light over a winter landscape, then settling back into the stillness from which it came. Thus the year's great moments passed, not all triumphant, not all sorrowful, but each leaving its own quiet mark on the unfolding story of the world. Daily life around the world. If world events are like the large, slow-turning hands of a clock, daily life is the quiet ticking inside, steady, constant, intimate. In 1915, the rhythm of ordinary days carried millions of lives forward, each in its own soft pattern. In the United States, in cities such as New York, Chicago, and Boston, the mornings began with a mingling of sounds. The faint clang of trolley bells, the rumble of elevated trains, the clip-clop of horses pulling milk wagons down cobblestone streets. Sidewalks smelled faintly of coal smoke and bakery bread, a blend that was part of the urban air itself. Women in ankle-length skirts and tailored jackets moved briskly towards shops or offices, often with a small hat tilted just so, its brim casting a shadow over the eyes. Men wore felt fedoras or bowlers, carrying folded newspapers under their arms. For many, work meant the factory floor, rooms lit by tall windows, the air warm with the scent of oil and wood shavings, the rhythmic hiss and clank of machinery, a constant companion. Others worked in department stores, telegraph offices, or on streetcars, each job a small cog in the machinery of city life. Lunch might be a paper-wrapped sandwich eaten on a bench in the park, with pigeons bobbing nearby in hopeful curiosity. Beyond the city, in small towns and rural communities, the pace was slower but no less full. Farmers rose before the sun, pulling on wool sweaters against the morning chill. Horses stamped their hooves in the frost-covered fields, waiting to be hitched to plows. In the kitchen, wood-burning stoves radiated steady heat, and coffee percolated in metal pots, filling the air with a scent as comforting as any fire. Evenings in both city and countryside often meant gathering around the family piano or gramophone. Popular songs, perhaps It's a Long Way to Tipperary or Keep the Home Fires Burning, were played softly, sung in voices meant for the room, not the stage. By 9 or 10 o'clock, most lights were dimmed, electricity was spreading, but many homes still relied on gas lamps or kerosene. In Europe, in Paris, life continued with a mixture of resilience and routine. Cafes opened early, setting out tables on the pavement, even in the cool air. The smell of coffee and fresh baguettes drew in workers, students, and soldiers on leave. The war had brought changes. Women in dark dresses working in roles once held by men, small ration adjustments, quiet absences in the crowds. But the hum of the city persisted. Bookstalls along the Seine offered both the latest novels and old volumes with pages browned by time. In London, the morning streets bustled with a similar mix of business and domestic errands. Double-decker buses, still open on top, rolled along routes lined with shop fronts displaying everything from wool coats to pocket watches. In working-class neighborhoods, children played with hoops or marbles in narrow alleys, their laughter echoing between brick walls. Tea was a constant comfort, served strong, with milk and perhaps a small scone if sugar was available. In rural France, Belgium, and Italy, life was tied closely to the seasons. Spring meant planting, summer meant long days in the fields, autumn brought the harvest, and winter the slow, careful maintenance of tools and homes. Even under the shadow of war, these rhythms continued, though often with fewer hands to tend them. in the Ottoman Empire and Middle East. In Anatolian villages, narrow lanes wound between stone or mud brick houses, their walls washed in pale lime. Donkeys and mules carried bundles of firewood, their hooves making soft thuds on the earth. Women in long skirts and patterned headscarves drew water from communal wells, their buckets creaking on ropes. The scent of baking flatbread and simmering stews drifted from open doorways, and in courtyards, children played with hoops made from bent reeds. In Mesopotamian towns, markets offered dates piled high in baskets, sacks of grain, and clay jars of olive oil. Merchants called out softly to passers-by, praising the sweetness of their figs or the richness of their coffee. The call to prayer marked the day's rhythm, its melodic lines rising above the murmur of daily trade. In East Asia, in Japan, 1915 lay in the early years of the Taisho era. Cities like Tokyo and Osaka balanced tradition and modernity. Rickshaws and streetcars shared the same roads, and wooden shop signs hung beside electric street lamps. In small towns, shopkeepers still swept their entryways each morning with straw brooms, arranging goods in neat rows, lacquered bowls, folded fabrics, and bundles of tea leaves tied with twine. Farther north, in rural Hokkaido, life was quieter still. The winters were long and snowy. Homes were warmed with charcoal braziers, and meals often included pickled vegetables stored from autumn's harvest. In fishing villages, men mended their nets indoors while women prepared dried fish to last through the cold months. In China, the year brought political shifts, but much of daily life in villages continued much as it had for generations. Early mornings began with the smell of rice porridge cooking over open flames, and the clatter of wooden carrying poles as farmers set out for the fields. In cities like Beijing, rickshaw drivers called out to pedestrians, and narrow alleyways were filled with the sounds of street vendors selling dumplings, tea, and roasted chestnuts. In Africa, in Cairo, the broad boulevards built under earlier modernization bustled with a mix of donkeys, carriages, and motor cars. Street cafes served sweet, strong coffee in small cups, and the scent of roasting chickpeas and spiced meats drifted through the air. Vendors sold dates, oranges, and figs from wooden carts, their calls blending into the constant hum of the city. In West African villages, life moved to the steady rhythm of the seasons and the land. Morning light revealed women drawing water from rivers, pounding grain with long wooden pestles, and laying out fabrics dyed in deep indigo to dry in the sun. Children herded goats or carried baskets to market, while elders sat in shaded courtyards, weaving baskets or telling stories. In the Pacific and Australasia, in Sydney, trams rattled along George Street, and ferries crossed the harbor with a regular, calming pace. The war had drawn many young men overseas, but the city still bustled. Women shopped for fresh fish at markets near the wharves, and children played cricket in quiet side streets. In smaller towns, the railway station was often the hub of life, with mail, goods, and passengers arriving in a burst of steam before the quiet returned. In New Zealand, rural life was close to the land. Sheep grazed in rolling green pastures, and farmhouses stood amid orchards and vegetable gardens. Families gathered for supper at wooden tables, lit by kerosene lamps, the day's work fading into the gentle comfort of evening. Across all these regions, 1915's daily life was shaped by the tools, tastes, and tempos of the time. Handwritten letters folded and sealed with care, markets alive with the scent of fresh produce and spices, the slow comfort of home-cooked meals, and the reliable cycles of day into night. These were the moments that made up the quiet heartbeat of the year, small, steady, and full of the textures that time carries forward in memory. Science, inventions, and technology. If the great events of 1915 were like waves cresting on the sea of history, Then science and invention were the steady currents beneath, subtle but powerful, carrying the world into new shapes, in the quiet of the cosmos. The year opened with stargazers and mathematicians looking upward and outward. In the southern hemisphere, at the Union Observatory in Johannesburg, South African astronomer Robert Innes identified a star so near, so quietly present in the night sky, that it would eventually be named Proxima Centauri, our closest stellar neighbor beyond the Sun. At the time, there was no fanfare, no flashing announcement, just careful notes in a logbook and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the cosmos had yielded another secret. In Cambridge, England, physicist Sir Joseph Larmor published findings on how air temperature might influence the bending of starlight. A question born of subtle curiosity, the sort of thought that drifts into a scientist's mind while watching a winter night sky. His work was a small step in the greater journey toward understanding the way light moves through the universe. Whispers of a New Physics. On November 25th, in a lecture hall in Berlin, Albert Einstein stood before a chalkboard and presented his field equations of general relativity. The air in the room was cool. The chalk made a soft rasp as it drew curves and symbols. He explained, in careful tones, how mass and energy could bend space and time, and how gravity was not a force in the old Newtonian sense, but a bending of the very fabric of reality. Most in the audience would need time to truly absorb it, but the quiet magnitude of the moment was unmistakable. It was as though a new map of the universe had been gently unrolled. Discoveries in the natural world. In Egypt, German paleontologist Ernst Stromer published descriptions of a newly identified dinosaur, Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, a creature that once roamed North Africa in a wetter, greener age. His notes described its long, spined back and unusual proportions, details pieced together from fossils brought out of the desert sands. These were not merely curiosities but windows into vanished worlds. In geology, the German meteorologist Alfred Wegener quietly released his theory of continental drift. He proposed that Earth's continents had once formed a single massive landmass, Pangaea, and had slowly drifted apart over millions of years. Many in the scientific community were skeptical, but the idea was a seed planted in 1915 that would grow in decades to come. In the realm of medicine. Far across the Pacific, in Hawaii, a young chemist named Alice Ball developed a way to make chalmugra oil, a traditional treatment for leprosy, more effective by creating a water-soluble form. Her method meant the medicine could be more easily absorbed by the body, offering relief and dignity to patients who had long faced both the illness and the social stigma that came with it. Public health efforts were expanding in other places too. In the United States and Europe, campaigns promoted pasteurized milk to reduce disease, and infant care manuals began to appear in print. Simple booklets that advised mothers on nutrition, hygiene, and rest for newborns. Industrial progress. In Detroit, the hum of the Ford Motor Company's assembly line was steady and sure. The moving belt, introduced only a few years earlier, carried parts along at a pace matched to the workers' hands. In December, the company reached a milestone. The 1 millionth Ford car rolled out of the plant. Its paint shone under electric lights. Its horn gave a polite, brassy note when pressed. To most people, the car was still a novelty, but it was becoming more affordable and more common with each passing year. In Britain, another kind of machine took shape in secret. Engineers and mechanics, working in workshops that smelled of oil and hot metal, built the first prototype tank, nicknamed Little Willie. Its tracks clanked softly as it moved across a test field, the sound unlike any other machine of its time. It was slow, heavy, and imperfect, but it represented a new kind of mobility that would change warfare forever. Everyday innovations. In 1915, Technology was not just about monumental theories or industrial marvels. It also touched daily life in quieter ways. In makeup, Thomas Lyle Williams created the first Maybelline mascara, inspired by his sister Mabel's homemade mixture of coal dust and Vaseline. He packaged it in small, convenient tubes, making it one of the first widely sold cosmetic products for everyday use. In advertising, neon lighting was patented by French engineer Georges Claude. His invention promised a new way to illuminate shop signs and theaters, bathing nighttime streets in soft, colored glow. In animation, Max Fleischer patented the rotoscope, a device that allowed animators to trace over live-action film, giving movement to drawn characters with unprecedented realism. In the field of engineering, Wolfgang Gaede introduced the diffusion pump, a device capable of achieving high vacuums essential for scientific research. This would later find use in everything from electron microscopes to semiconductor manufacturing. Mathematics and the poetry of symmetry. In Göttingen, Germany, mathematician Emmy Noether published her theorem linking the symmetries of physical systems to conservation laws, showing, for example, how the symmetry of time relates to the conservation of energy. It was a result of rare elegance, the kind that mathematicians describe with the same reverence artists reserve for a perfect composition. At the same time, Polish mathematician Wacław Sierpiński described a geometric figure that would later bear his name. The Sierpiński triangle, a fractal made by repeatedly removing smaller triangles from a larger one. Its recursive beauty was a reminder that mathematics could be as visual and meditative as a work of art. The air grows busier. In March, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, was founded in the United States. It began with only a handful of members and a modest budget, but its purpose was clear: to study the problems of flight and improve the nation's aeronautical technology. From its first meetings, held in quiet offices, a path was set that would one day lead to jet engines, supersonic travel, and even spacecraft. Air travel in 1915 was still in its infancy. Airplanes were mostly wood and fabric, their engines loud and their range limited. Yet each flight, even short hops from one airfield to another, drew curious onlookers who tilted their heads to watch these fragile machines pass overhead. In the laboratories, workshops, and quiet offices of 1915, progress was not rushed. It moved at the pace of patient observation, steady refinement, and the quiet conviction that the world could be understood and improved through thought and careful hands. These were the seeds from which the future would grow, sown in a year whose greatest changes often began in stillness. Culture and the arts. The arts in 1915 were a bridge between worlds, the lingering elegance of the 19th century still in the air, yet new forms of expression quietly stepping forward. Across continents, people sought beauty, reflection, and entertainment, even as the larger world shifted around them. The silver screen's gentle glow. Cinema, still young, was a marvel that could turn a quiet evening into a journey. In 1915, people gathered in picture houses that smelled faintly of sawdust and warm dust from the projectors. Seats were wooden or padded with red velvet, and the flicker of light on the screen bathed the audience in a moving glow. That year saw the release of The Birth of a Nation, directed by D.W. Griffith. Technically innovative, it used cross-cutting, dramatic close-ups, and an epic sense of scale that shaped filmmaking for decades. Its content carried deep controversy, reflected even at the time, but for many audiences, it was the first experience of cinema as a sweeping, large-scale narrative. The hush that fell over the theater during its longer sequences was like the stillness before a storm. Far lighter in tone was Charlie Chaplin's The Tramp, which introduced the character who would become an enduring figure in cinema. Chaplin's gentle, expressive pantomime brought both humor and pathos, making audiences smile with small, human moments, a shy glance, a misplaced step, a hopeful gesture. In these silent films, music from a live pianist or small ensemble guided the mood, sometimes playful, sometimes tender, turning the moving images into a full sensory lullaby. The concert hall and the salon. In Europe's concert halls, music wove warmth through the winter months. On December 8th, in Helsinki, Jean Sibelius premiered his Symphony No. 5, composed to mark his own 50th birthday, a day declared a national holiday in Finland. The piece rose from quiet, pastoral themes into sweeping harmonies. Those who heard it spoke of how it mirrored the vast landscapes of the north, the still lakes, the flight of swans, the slow arrival of spring after a long winter. Each movement carried the patient grace of the natural world. In salons and smaller gatherings, pianos and string quartets offered more intimate pleasures. In Paris, musicians played the works of Debussy and Ravel. In Vienna, the tradition of Schubert-Lieder remained strong, with singers leaning close to their audiences, each note carrying the faint scent of candle wax and polished wood. The printed page. Books in 1915 came in many forms. Serial fiction published in weekly magazines, small poetry chapbooks, sturdy cloth-bound novels for home libraries. Popular reading included adventure tales, romances, and political essays. The war years also saw a rise in soldier memoirs and frontline poetry, sometimes printed in small runs by local presses. In Britain, poets like Rupert Brooke and Julian Grenfell had begun to shape the public's view of the war through verse that blended patriotism with lyric beauty. Elsewhere, literature reached into philosophy and criticism. In France, Marcel Proust was deep in the writing of In Search of Lost Time, a project that would stretch into the decade. In the United States, Willa Cather's The Song of the Lark was published, its prose celebrating the slow, determined growth of an artist's life. Galleries and studios. Art in 1915 reflected both continuity and change. In Paris and London, exhibitions showcased Impressionist and post-Impressionist works that had shocked audiences only a generation before, but now felt familiar and beloved. Paintings by Monet, Renoir, and Cezanne hung beside newer, more experimental pieces from Cubists like Picasso and Braque. In New York, the energy of the Armory show 2 years earlier was still influencing American artists, encouraging bolder forms and colors. Studios smelled of linseed oil and turpentine. Unfinished canvases leaned against walls, their subjects half-formed. Sculpture, too, carried new voices. Henri Gaudibert, a French artist living in Britain, had been part of the Vorticist movement, creating angular, modern forms inspired by the machinery of the age. His death in June 1915 cut short a promising career, but the pieces he left behind retained their quiet power. Everyday creativity. Beyond the great names, creativity lived in everyday life. In small towns, amateur theater groups staged plays in community halls, lit by kerosene lamps. Costumes were sewn at home from donated fabric, and the audience often knew the actors personally. In homes, embroidery, quilting, and knitting were as much creative outlets as practical tasks. War relief groups in Britain, France, and America organized knitting circles where scarves, socks, and mittens were made for soldiers abroad. The steady click of needles was both a rhythm of comfort and an act of care. Music spilled from many doorways. Gramophones playing tinny but beloved recordings, church choirs rehearsing hymns, children practicing scales on upright pianos. Even in rural areas without electricity, pump organs and fiddles brought life to gatherings after the day's work was done. Tradition meets modernity. In Japan, 1915 was marked by the enthronement of Emperor Taisho in Kyoto. The ceremony blended ancient court rituals, silk garments, formal processions, the presentation of sacred regalia, with the presence of new technologies like electric lighting and photographic equipment to record the event. The contrast of centuries-old tradition with the quiet hum of modern devices reflected a world slowly learning to hold both past and future at once. In other parts of Asia, traditional theater thrived. Beijing opera in China, with its elaborate costumes and stylized movement. Kathakali in India, with bold makeup and precise gestures. These performances were as much communal events as artistic ones, drawing neighbors together in shared appreciation. In 1915, the arts offered not escape from reality, but a way of framing it through melody, image, and story. They gave beauty to the days, shape to the emotions, and color to the long stretches of time. Whether in the dim hush of a cinema, the warm echo of a concert hall, or the simple comfort of a song sung at home, the year's cultural life moved gently, like a hand smoothing the creases from a page. Media and headlines. In 1915, news did not arrive in glowing screens or instant alerts. It came on paper that carried the faint scent of ink and pulp, sometimes still warm from the press. The delivery was often physical, slipped through a letter slot by a newsboy in the gray light of morning, or purchased from a kiosk where bundles were stacked neatly in rows. The daily paper. In big cities, London, New York, Paris, Berlin, the front pages told of weighty matters. Headlines in bold type announced the Gallipoli landings, the sinking of the Lusitania, or the Zimmerwald conference in Switzerland. The letters were sharp and black, printed on wide sheets that unfolded like a map of the day's world. Between those headlines were columns of smaller stories, agricultural reports, political speeches, theater reviews, and serialized fiction. The war occupied much space, but editors still made room for lighter notes. A new bakery opening in a Paris neighborhood, the result of a cricket match in Melbourne, the latest fashion sketches from London dressmakers. Readers often began with these smaller pieces before bracing themselves for the heavier news. Magazines and periodicals. Weekly and monthly magazines offered a slower, more reflective rhythm. In the United States, the Saturday Evening Post carried illustrated covers, often showing scenes of domestic life. Families at the dinner table, children playing in the snow. Inside were short stories, household advice, advertisements for soap and gramophones, and essays on current events. In Britain, the Illustrated London News brought the war into living rooms with black and white photographs and engravings, each image carefully captioned. It was one of the few ways many people could visualize events happening far from home. In France, Le Petit Journal still used bright color lithographs for its Sunday supplements, images that could be both beautiful and dramatic, suitable for display on a wall. For those with a taste for the arts, journals like the Musical Times or the Studio carried concert reviews, exhibition notices, and essays on technique. Literary magazines offered poems and serialized novels, keeping readers engaged week after week. The voice of the trenches. On the front lines, soldiers created their own newspapers, typed or handwritten, then mimeographed for distribution within their unit. These trench papers mixed humor, satire, and fragments of home life. They reported on the weather in the trenches, the condition of rations, and the comings and goings of officers. Sometimes there were cartoons poking fun at daily inconveniences, or verses written in spare moments between duties. The tone was often wry, but never bitter. These publications were meant to lift spirits, to make a comrade smile for a moment, even if the paper was damp from the rain or smudged with mud. Advertising and everyday details. Advertisements in 1915 had their own charm. Full sentences in polite tones, promising quality and reliability. A Ford motor car ad might invite you to see America first in your own vehicle, priced at $490. A cosmetics company might promise lashes dark as midnight with a new Maybelline mascara. Clothing ads showed women in tailored coats with fur collars, men in three-piece suits and bowler hats, and children in sailor outfits or pinafores. Prices themselves told quiet stories. A loaf of bread for a few cents, a cinema ticket for a dime, a pound of coffee for 25 cents. These numbers grounded life in the rhythms of wages, savings, and small luxuries. How news was read. In urban cafes, a single newspaper might pass through a dozen hands before midday. In rural areas, a copy could travel from house to house, folded and refold until the paper grew soft at the creases. Some families read aloud in the evening, the light from a kerosene lamp pooling over the page. Children listened, half understanding, as parents discussed the meaning of far-off events. Without radio in every home, wireless sets were still a rarity. Print was the primary link to the wider world. The rustle of pages, the smudge of ink on fingertips, the sight of a fresh edition in a shop window. These were the cues that news had arrived. In 1915, the media was not instantaneous, but it was tangible. You could hold it, fold it, and keep it. A headline could be clipped and tucked into a letter, a photograph pinned above a desk. News lingered longer this way, its presence woven into the fabric of daily life, waiting for the next edition to unfold the next chapter of the year. People born and died. The year 1915 was like a vast garden where some blossoms were only beginning to open, while others, brilliant in their own seasons, were falling gently to the earth. Each birth and death marked a quiet note in the melody of the year, threads in a tapestry that stretched across decades and continents. Notable births. Alan Watts, January 6th, Chislehurst, England. The winter air in Kent was crisp when Alan Wilson Watts entered the world. In time, he would become a philosopher, writer, and speaker who brought Eastern ideas, Taoism, Zen, and Hindu philosophy, to Western audiences with warmth and clarity. His voice, rich and measured, would one day be heard in radio broadcasts and lecture halls, inviting listeners to see life not as a problem to be solved, but as a dance to be enjoyed. Billie Holiday, April 7th, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Born Eleanora Fagan, she would grow to become one of the most soulful voices in American music. Her singing, intimate, emotive, and unmistakably her own, would breathe life into songs like Strange Fruit and God Bless the Child. In 1915, she was simply a newborn swaddled in a blanket, her destiny unwritten but already tuned to the music of feeling. Grace Lee Boggs, June 27th, Providence, Rhode Island. Daughter of Chinese immigrants, Grace would become a philosopher, activist, and author, working tirelessly for civil rights, labor rights, and community building in Detroit. Her life would span nearly a century, and her quiet, determined voice would inspire countless others to see activism not only as protest, but as the slow, steady work of creating a better world. Roland Barthes, Novembre 12, Cherbourg, France. As a child, Barthes would know both illness and deep study. As an adult, he would become one of the 20th century's most influential thinkers in literature and cultural theory. His works on semiotics, photography, and the textures of everyday life would invite readers to notice the hidden meanings in the simplest of things. Edith Piaf, December 19th, Paris, France. Legend has it that she was born under a street lamp in Belleville, though official records tell of her birth in a hospital. Either way, her childhood was marked by hardship, and her adulthood by a voice that could move listeners to tears. Piaf's songs would become anthems of longing, resilience, and love. Her La Vie en Rose, a lullaby for the heart. Frank Sinatra, December 12th, Hoboken, New Jersey. In the same year, across the Atlantic, another future icon of song arrived. Known as O.L. Blue Eyes, Sinatra's smooth phrasing and effortless charm would make him a star on stage, in recordings, and on the silver screen. In 1915, however, he was simply a newborn in a modest home in Hoboken, wrapped against the winter chill. Notable deaths. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, May 7th, aboard RMS Lusitania. A businessman remembered for calm generosity in a final hour. His name carried gently across oceans as families read the lists in silence. Edith Cavell, October 12th, Brussels, Belgium. A nurse whose courage became a lantern for many. Her final words placed compassion above all. The memory of her composure moved quietly from chapel to newspaper to whispered prayer. Henri Gaudier-Bezeska, June 5th, Neuville-Saint-Vaast, France. A sculptor whose modern lines seemed to hum with mechanical grace. His brief career leaving forms that still feel alert in museum light. Julien Granfell, Mai 26, Boulogne-sur-Mer, France. A poet whose verses read like bright banners in early pages, then like folded letters placed carefully in a drawer. Émile Lasque, May 26th, Eastern Front. A philosopher whose work with ideas of logic and value now rests between covers, visited by readers who find there the quiet persistence of thought. These lives, some long, some brief, entered and left the world of 1915 with the same soft certainty that guides dawn into day and evening into night. Their voices, in different registers, continue to echo. As the final weeks of 1915 approached, the world exhaled in a long, quiet breath. It had been a year of measured steps, of events that rippled far beyond the days in which they occurred. Yet alongside those turning points, life had gone on in familiar rhythms, baking bread, tending gardens, sending letters, mending clothes. Now, with winter folding itself around the northern hemisphere, the year prepared to hand its stories to the one that would follow. The year in seasons. January began in stillness. Frost traced the edges of window panes, and breath hung in the air like small clouds. Chimneys marked the sky with thin threads of smoke, each one a sign of a hearth below. The new year felt like a clean page, even as the world wrote on it with a heavy hand. Spring crept in, snow receding into puddled alleys and soft fields. Farmers mended fences. City markets brightened with early greens. News of movements and declarations traveled by telegraph and ship, reaching kitchens where a kettle sang and a newspaper lay folded beside a loaf of bread. Summer brought long days that warmed stone and soil. Children chalked hopscotch grids, fresh fruit piled up in baskets, and music drifted from open windows on languid evenings. Yet ships set out and returned changed. Railways carried uniforms and letters. Quiet prayers gathered in rooms where names were softly spoken. Autumn arrived in muted golds. Harvests were gathered. Cellars filled with jars and sacks. Sweaters came down from high shelves. The papers brought mixed accounts, resilience and retreat, meetings in Swiss villages, an idea about space and time that seemed to bend the mind as surely as gravity bends light. Lamps glowed earlier each day. Winter returned with its old poise. Streets glazed with frost. Breath rose in plumes. Windows showed small domestic scenes. Someone reading, someone sewing, someone staring out at the first snowfall. The year read itself back in memory and found, among the bold marks of history, countless small acts of care. A door held open, a parcel sent, a note tucked inside a book. Looking toward 1916. Midnight did not transform the world. It merely turned the page with a soft rustle. In city squares and village lanes, bells marked the hour. In homes, glasses touched with restrained toasts. The future was unknown, as it always is, but the present was steady. A lamp, a warm cup, a loved one's voice in the next room. The year 1915 closed like the final page of a long, handwritten letter. Ink dried, paper folded, the words resting quietly in the dark. Its story, with all its contrasts, its endurance and invention, was complete. And like any well-told tale, it left behind an aftertaste of reflection, a quiet invitation to remember and to learn. And so, dear friend, our quiet walk through the year 1915 draws to a close. We have wandered together through its frosted mornings and summer evenings, through its bustling markets and hushed concert halls. We have stood at the edges of great events and lingered in the doorways of ordinary homes. We have met the voices born that year and bowed our heads for those who departed. Like a lantern carried through dim corridors, we have let the light of the past guide us gently, step by step. And now, that light softens and dims, not in loss, but in the natural way of a journey ending. Ahead lies the stillness of your own rest, where today's thoughts can settle like leaves on calm water. If this shared hour has brought you comfort, I would be deeply grateful if you would gently press the like button and subscribe so that we may continue these slow journeys together, through years yet to be explored, each with its own texture, its own quiet music. Your presence here makes these travels possible, and it is a joy to know we share them. For now, close your eyes a little more fully. Let the warmth of your blanket, the softness of your breathing, and the rhythm of your own heart be the only sounds you hear. Sleep deeply, and when you wake, may the peace of 1915 still linger, like the last note of a song drifting into silence. Good night from Toro. Until we meet again.